We're not.
So we're going to do our first walkthrough of a bill. This is H541. This is a bill to respond to municipal needs to abate flooded properties. I worked really closely with Senator Cummings this summer on drafting this bill. Tax department's already looked at it. Representative Anthony was very involved. Likely, we're going to wait for Senator Cummings introduced an identical bill in the Senate. We're likely going to wait for the Senate to pass the bill and have that be the version that becomes law, but wanted to go as fast as possible because municipalities really need a quick response on this. And of course, so any sort of amendments or changes we might want to make or any discussion we want to have, wanted to get in front of that by reviewing this version. But if we are holding off on a vote after everyone sort of feels okay about a version of the bill, that would be why. And with that, Kirby, would you like to come tell us about H541?
Kirby Keaton, Legislative Counsel.
Oh, one more piece of context. We basically did an almost identical thing after Irene. There's just some changes from that, so there's precedent for this happening. Anyway, back to you, Kirby. You need to join the meeting again.
So I'm just going to share the bill, with the committee. And get started. We'll get faster at this. Sorry, I lost it.
Okay, I actually find this to be one of the most relaxing parts of the entire day.
Your moment is in.
Feel free to take your time.
Meditation.
It's really
Quite wonderful.
Would it help if I just gave any background while we're hunting? During Irene, or the aftermath of Irene in 2011, the legislature faced the same problem, namely floodwaters literally destroyed significant portions of Grand List in a lot of counties. The Board of Abatement, meeting locally, abated taxes. The net result, of course, is the Grand List shrinks, tax revenue shrink, and in some communities, this decline was severe. In others, it was marginal. So the thought was at that time, and repeated again this time, that at least for those communities with serious declines and with a serious number of properties whose habitability and survivability is over the 50% substantially damaged threshold, that the state would step in and essentially forgive, and not just loan, but forgive the ordinary submission of education taxes for a specific duration of time. And that's what this bill does. It simply repeats that process from 2012.
Yeah, so, what really happens to the ed fund? We're taking this out of the ed fund.
So we're gonna get a fiscal note from Julia after, so I think that might be the best.
Yeah, then you'll know.
Okay.
I'm thinking about properties now in some cities where their value has gone down because of the people who are unhoused, who are on the streets. And what relief they might get.
So this bill is specifically about flood, it's a responsible flood damage explicitly. And we'll talk more, Kirby will talk more about this. But essentially, there's a period, a grand list any property can be reappraised on a grand list, right? This is for property tax bills that have already been sent out, that have changed their value significantly since the bill went out. By the time we sort of get to the next grand list year, it becomes a moot point. But Kirby has the bill up and we'll explain that.
Okay, so I apologize for the delay.
No, fine.
Yeah, so I'll walk through. So the first subsection of the bill is about reimbursing municipalities for abatement of property taxes, specifically for the state education property taxes. This is how it works for the bill. Municipality applies to the Department of Taxes for reimbursement for state education taxes that are owed. The abatements that you can get reimbursement for, or a municipality can get reimbursement for, would be from April 15, 2023 up to April 15 of 2024. So the abatement must have been proportional between education and municipal taxes, which means that if education taxes were abated, but municipal taxes were not, then the reimbursement for the education taxes would not be eligible. But there is a provision where abatement can be reconsidered under this bill also. So if that were the case, a municipality could go back and reconsider and abate the municipal taxes so that they could be reimbursed for state education taxes, if that makes sense. Also, to get reimbursement, municipality, the abatement must have been for, and this is quoting from the bill, property lost or destroyed due to severe storms and flooding in a federally declared disaster area between July 1 and October 15. So the areas in which abatement is allowed or reimbursement for abatement is allowed are known because of that federal disaster area. And then there's further requirements that an eligible property has to meet certain requirements. There's 4 different ways that that a municipality can get reimbursement for an abatement for a specific eligible property. So the property would have had to have had a 50% or greater loss in value to the primary structure on the property, or a loss of use by the property owner of the primary structure on the property for 60 days or more, or a loss of access by the property owner to utilities for the primary structure on the property for 60 days or more, or there was condemnation of the primary structure on the property under federal, state, or municipal law. So those are the requirements to qualify for abatement. The Department of Taxes, again, would have to review these applications and decide whether reimbursement is applicable. The department also, just farther down, has the ability to adopt application and approval procedures for reimbursements made to municipalities.
As you're doing this, it's helpful if you could sort of point out the sections that you're describing and stay on the sections with your scroller bar, so we don't.
Right.
So we don't
Car
have
sick.
to
Thank you.
House is slippery, getting used to a lot of things. So it's the sub-C down here that,
Thank you.
that shows, and it's procedures, I would point out, it's not rules or anything like that. So don't get car sick, I'm gonna go back up a little bit to the interest section. So there's reimbursement for abatement, which is the first subsection. The second one handles interest. So in this case, municipality could also apply to being reimbursed for interest that it incurred under certain circumstances, and I'll just read that. It's due to disruption to tax collections resulting from flooding in an area that was part of the federal disaster area. And so the scenario would be when the municipality owed payments for state education taxes and would have had to borrow funds to make those payments because taxes weren't able to be collected. So the interest on what was borrowed to pay the state education fund is what could be forgiven. It has to be reasonable interest, and there's a cap on of 8%. It shall not, like the reimbursement shall not exceed 8% interest.
And that's entirely separate from the abatement for individual properties.
Right, this would be a separate thing a municipality would apply for.
So even if there was no abatement requested for individual properties, you could get the reimbursement fee.
Yeah, so those are separate things, and it would be the same application process through the Department of Taxes.
Yeah. And do these communities have to be within those sections of the state that were declared disaster? Very little in Franklin County was declared, but we had some damage. And they have to be within those declared areas.
For both forms of reimbursement, yes. It's linked to the federally declared disaster area.
And we can talk to the tax department when they come in to discuss this about why they recommended it would be shaped that way, because I understand that it leaves out certain areas of the state. And we can, absolutely discuss that. Yeah.
So this does not change the abatement process at all in the municipal, at the local level. It is only a reimbursement of the abatement.
Yes, so the abatement process is, under Vermont law, a process where municipality has a board of abatement and it has control over whether that board has control over whether they grant abatement or not. There's no state intervention or requirement.
If they grant abatement, or if they don't grant abatement, then there's no reimbursement. If they do grant abatement, then it goes up and applies, and that's when these criteria kick in as to whether they are able to get that reimbursement. The actual, okay. Got it.
And as I mentioned before, there is a provision here allowing the boards of abatement to reconsider. So if they had previously had, because maybe the municipality thought they couldn't afford to abate, maybe in light of if this were to become law, that they could reconsider. But again, they would have to abate the municipal taxes in addition to the education taxes under this bill. So it's not just, so that means the municipality would lose something and not be reimbursed when it comes to the municipal taxes.
To that point, is there any component of this includes like outreach and education to flood impacted communities that may not have given concern do it to make them aware that this is, if we were to pass this, is there an outreach education component?
Not currently in the bill. There's one thing about the sub B, the interest provision that I would point out, and that's that the requirement to qualify for reimbursement of the interest is written in the bill to be based off of tax collections that didn't happen or were disrupted resulting from flooding in an area specifically. Whereas for the abatement, the eligible properties could have been damaged due to flooding or severe storms. There's a difference between those, between the interest and the abatement sections, subsections.
And I think that was, I don't want to call it a typo, but an oversight in drafting.
Yeah, the interest subsection is exactly like the Irene relief. The abatement section is mostly like the Irene, except that the eligible property specifications there were not in the Irene bill.
And the intent would be to make them both severe storm and flooding?
Yes. Because of the way, in sort of previous conversations we had about this, it was because of the sort of severe storms that happened before, you know, as everyone knows, that sort of period where the damage occurred was broader than the specific flooding. And our federal disaster declaration matches that broader definition. Back to you, Kirby.
So the only thing else the only thing left to go over is just that there's a provision here. This is again like the Irene relief bill that gives the Agency of Education authority and some options and how it goes about the reimbursements. And we covered this about how the Board of Abatement may consider a decision going back to April 1st, 2023. And that has to do with grand list filings, I think. And then the last thing is clarification or it's not a clarification, it's an amendment to the law for tax years 2023 and 2024, stating that disaster relief payments would not be part of the household income calculation for property tax credits. And for the, I didn't mention this before, but in the abatement parts, the property tax credit is taken into account before the reimbursement for abatement.
Thoughts, questions, anyone? Okay, thank you very much. Julia, you're on.
Right. Right. Good morning. For the record, I'm Julia Richter with the Joint Fiscal Office. Pulling up my fiscal note here for the bill. I'll stay very high level unless the committee has, or the chair has specific questions you'd like me to dive into. So JFO estimates this bill will cost $1.1 million to the education fund in fiscal year 25. As the committee is well aware, and we spoke about yesterday, absent any changes in policy, this means that the homestead yield and or the non-homestead property tax rate would need to be adjusted in order to account for the $1.1 million cost to the ed fund. Would you like me to speak about anything in particular?
Representative Brannigan and then Representative Beck.
Okay, so I hope Scott has the same question I do, but anyway, so why do we owe the ed fund money? Because we're taking it and we're giving it back to them.
Right, so this is a reimbursing property tax abatements. So currently the municipalities have abated or have the option to abate property taxes. These are property taxes that are owed to the statewide education fund. And so essentially what this bill is doing is saying that instead of the municipality being responsible for covering that cost, the education fund is picking up that cost. So these are statewide property taxes that essentially are not being collected from these property taxpayers. And as such, there's $1.1 million that are not going to be collected from these properties and thus need to be made up elsewhere.
So my question is why is it fiscal year 25? These homes were damaged in 23. The taxes have been collected in calendar year 23, which is fiscal year 24. So, I mean, I know it all flows through in the end to, you're short in 24, so you take it up in 25, but the cost is in 24, right?
I would say, yes, the cost was incurred in 24, but because the yields were set and the yields have already been set for FY 24, this is going to need to be made up in the FY 25 yields.
Right, but we're not collecting that money in fiscal year 24.
Correct, and so it needs to be raised.
It'll
and-
flow through to 25.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure on that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Representatives?
So to get to that 1.1 million, I assume you had to like estimate how many properties, and I'm curious if you have are able to provide additional detail about like where we expect those properties to be, how many of the flood impacted communities have considered abatement?
Sure. So that estimate was done in consensus with the tax department using the latest data from September 2022, which was when we were working on the estimate together, and essentially looked at what the current property damage was that was estimated. Wasn't able to get a breakdown of the town by town level data at the time because and currently still, there's just so much going on that it was a lower priority in terms of the estimate. So really what the estimate was saying, okay, in essence, what is the ballpark range of damaged property that we think would be eligible for property tax abatement? And then we created a range that said, okay, if all of these properties were in the lowest tax town versus the highest tax rate town, what is that range? And then use a little bit more information to further refine it. And if it's helpful context, the post-Irene relief program was estimated to cost $2 to $4 million. We haven't been able to find, a line item somewhere that's saying the specific cost, but based on the research that I've been able to do, it looks like the costs were around $500,000. So the cost estimate after Irene was higher based on the eligible properties that they thought at the time and was a lower estimate.
So I mean, I support this concept. I think and I hope that we can find a way to do it that all communities, including our most vulnerable, are able to take advantage of it. And I have concerns that like our high poverty communities with folks who need the abatement the most might be least confident in their ability to provide it. And so we'll be thinking about that as we move forward with this.
I think it would be if, after we finish hearing from Julia, let's talk about who else we would want to have in to make sure that we're all, have all the information we need to move forward. Any other questions about the fiscal note? Yeah.
So, well, maybe it's not the fiscal note. The other municipalities, what's going to be the format? This is explained here that they're declared disaster, eligible for disaster relief. So there's going to have to be a clear template for other municipalities to be able to tap into this.
I think that's a good question for the tax department, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just have to point out that it is still pending as to whether or not the December heavy rain that affected part of the state will or will not qualify as a disaster anyway, independently of the dates that are in the bill currently. But those dates could be changed, obviously, if the declaration comes through. We don't know that yet.
But this would only help if people didn't pay their property taxes to the city. If they paid their education fund taxes, then they paid them, and the city doesn't. And there's no relief for
I
them.
think that's a question for Kirby, actually, not for Julia, so. But I don't think that's entirely accurate. Any other questions for Julia? Great, thank you, Julia. I am going to ask us to do a quick brainstorm of witnesses, and then we can have Kirby come back if we have for further questions. So the league would have, of course, come in, the tax department's going to, of course, come in. In drafting the bill, we spoke to a very wide range of clerks and town managers in order to check the language. And the tax department did that as well. But if, folks have individual clerks or town managers that you think particularly need to testify on this, please do feel free to check in with me about those folks. And anyone else that needs to.
So my only question about the clerks would be, I'm glad to hear they've already been notified about this. Will they take care of the dispersing of information among themselves?
That would be a question to ask them. Yeah, treasurers. There's a Clerks and Treasurers Association, yep. Any other witnesses?
I thought, and maybe I'm wrong, that the governor secured a statewide declaration, and so worrying that one community is in and another is out I'd like that confirmed.
We can get that confirmed. I thought there was a county that was part two.
It was by county?
It's a mixed bag, and it's even a mixed bag within county sometimes.
Oh,
So we can,
okay.
and that's something that we can talk to the tax department about, or we can have the,
Emergency management or something.
yes.
Yeah,
We can have Doug Farnham in to discuss this as well.
that's right. Doug would do that. He would know.
Any other witnesses? Great, thank you. Kirby, can you hop back into the seat for just a second to answer Representative Odie's question?
Sure. Kirby Keaton, Legislative Council.
Well, I was thinking about how the estimate was 2 to 4 million for Irene, and it only ended up being a $500,000 amount that was needed from the ed fund. So I was thinking, we'll basically confront, how does it actually work? If the taxpayers, if 100% of the taxpayers in the town paid all their education taxes and then the municipality sent that in, then they don't get any of this relief?
Yeah, I think I can clarify. So a taxpayer would have to request abatement done for their property taxes in order for the Board of Abatement and municipality to grant it. So there could very well be a scenario where someone's home was destroyed or partially destroyed, and they just did not seek abatement and they just paid their property taxes. In which case, this bill would not reimburse for anything because there's nothing to reimburse. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Could someone pay their property taxes and then apply for abatement and then receive a refund from their town?
There's timelines for these things under the bill. The boards of abatement can go back and reconsider abatement that they'd already considered. But it's a different question of whether a new application, like a taxpayer freshly asking for abatement at this point, whether they would meet deadlines. And I would have to go look at the law to see how that could be.
All right. So if you didn't pay, you're okay, you'll be covered. But
If you didn't pay and you applied.
and you applied for the abatement,
And it was granted.
and it was granted. But if you did pay your tax and didn't apply for the abatement, you can't go back, and the city could the city, Board of Abatement call everybody. I mean, how would it work?
So there's deadlines for these things, and that's what I would have to go check, whether it's possible at this point to ask for abatement of taxes that go back to, say, July.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, but it's a matter of whether the deadlines to request abatement have been met.
So you'll look into that for us.
I can look into that.
Thank you. Representative Simpson.
Yeah, I think I'm particularly interested in that, and I don't know if VLCT or who the right person is, but I'd really like to understand what percent, we have lists of, folks who've applied for FEMA assistance and that have significant damage. I'd like to understand what percent of those have been abated and what haven't, and where those communities are, and again, personally, I haven't had to go through the abatement process myself. The individual property owner has to request abatement, right? And so it's really important for me, I think, to think about how we're doing outreach and what expectations for tax and boards of abatements to proactively go out to folks and make sure that they know that they're eligible. If we can adjust timelines to allow people to continue to request abatement for properties.
And those are all great questions for both Doug Farnham and the league. Representative.
Tucker Anderson would be the fellow about the municipal law side. As I understand it, having served on that board, there's no bar to retroactivity. But what we're discussing is the reimbursement, which is bracketed by the dates in the statute that we're talking about.
And Kirby will look into that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's specific criteria in the statute that establishes the right for reabatement if you apply. And there's no bar to retroactivity for the municipality, but that's a different question than the reimbursement issue.
And so Kirby will look into it and he will get back to us. Any other questions on this topic? If a witness comes to mind or there's a particular question you want to make sure a witness is able to answer, please let me know sometime in the next couple of days. Thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll be back here at 11:15 to talk about a municipal infrastructure report from Ted. Really, it's a 5-minute